the voice they trusted. The dust from the stagecoach hadn't even settled when Clara May Hensley stepped down onto the weathered planks of Broken Creek Station platform, her traveling dress already wilted from the long journey across the Wyoming Territory. She clutched her carpetbag tighter as the September wind whipped her auburn hair loose from its pins, and for a moment she wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Thomas Garrett had seemed decent enough in his letters, a widowed rancher in need of a wife to help manage his household. What he'd failed to mention was exactly how large that household was, or why 8 pairs of eyes now stared at her from the shadows of the station house porch with the wariness of cornered animals. Mrs. Hensley, the man who approached, removed his hat, revealing graying temples and lines etched deep by sun and sorrow. "I'm Thomas Garrett. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." Clara studied his weathered face, noting how his gaze kept drifting nervously toward the children huddled behind him. The oldest couldn't have been more than 14, the youngest barely old enough to walk. They watched her with hollow eyes that had seen too much, their clothes clean but patched, their silence absolute. "Mr. Garrett," she extended her gloved hand, which he shook briefly. "Your letters mentioned children, but 8 of them," he said quickly, as if confessing to a crime. "Not all mine by blood, mind you. Some are, well, they needed a place." His voice trailed off, and she noticed how the children seemed to shrink further into themselves at his words. The eldest, a girl with corn silk hair and Thomas's blue eyes, stepped forward slightly. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, her gaze dropping to the dusty boards. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Clara asked gently, crouching down to the girl's level. The child's lips moved soundlessly, and Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That's Sarah. They don't talk much. Haven't for some time now." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She looked at the other children, ranging from the teenage Sarah down to a tiny boy who couldn't have been more than 3, and saw the same haunted quality in each face. Whatever had silenced them ran deeper than simple shyness. The ride to the Garrett Ranch passed in uncomfortable quiet, the children packed into the back of the wagon like cargo, Thomas making strained conversation about the weather and the upcoming winter. Clara found herself studying the landscape, endless rolling hills dotted with cattle, the jagged peaks of the Rockies looming in the distance, and everywhere the vast, oppressive silence of the frontier. The ranch house was larger than she'd expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch and several outbuildings scattered across the property. It spoke of prosperity, but also of emptiness, like a stage set waiting for actors who had forgotten their lines. "I've prepared a room for you," Thomas said as he helped her down from the wagon. "Thought you might want some time to settle in before the ceremony." The ceremony. Clara had almost forgotten that she was here to be married, not just to become a governess to 8 silent children. She nodded, following him inside while the children trailed behind like ghosts. The house was clean but stark, functional furniture arranged with military precision. No family photographs graced the mantelpiece, no children's drawings decorated the walls. It felt more like a boarding house than a home. "Sarah helps with the cooking," Thomas explained, leading Clara up the stairs. "The boys do chores, they're good children. They'll warm up to you eventually." Clara doubted that. As she unpacked her few belongings in the spare room, she could hear the soft shuffle of feet in the hallway, whispered conferences conducted in voices too low to understand. These children weren't just quiet, they were afraid. That first evening, she sat at the long dining table with her new family, watching Thomas carve a chicken while the children ate in complete silence. They moved with practiced efficiency, passing dishes without being asked, cleaning up without instruction. It was impressive and heartbreaking in equal measure. "How long have they been like this?" Clara asked quietly when Thomas walked her to her room. His jaw tightened. "Some came that way. Others," he rubbed his face wearily. "This isn't an easy country, Mrs. Hensley. Sometimes children see things they shouldn't." "What kinds of things?" But Thomas had already turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Good night. We'll have the ceremony tomorrow afternoon if that suits you." Clara lay awake that night, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere down the hall, she heard the soft murmur of children's voices, so faint she might have imagined it. But she was certain she heard crying, quickly muffled. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as neighbors arrived for the wedding ceremony. Clara met them in a daze, shaking hands and accepting congratulations while she tried to process what she was really signing up for. The preacher was a kind-faced man who spoke of love and commitment, but Clara found herself looking past him to where the children sat in a row, watching the proceedings with the same hollow expressions. "Do you, Clara May Hensley, take this man?" She said yes, though part of her screamed that she should run back to Boston, back to her job as a seamstress in her cousin's shop, back to a life that made sense. But another part, the part that had been watching these children all morning, knew she couldn't leave them. That night, as Mrs. Clara Garrett, she made a decision. Instead of going to the room Thomas had prepared for her as his wife, she knocked softly on Sarah's door. "May I come in?" The girl looked surprised but nodded, scooting over to make room on the narrow bed. The room was small but neat, with two other girls sharing the space. They watched Clara with wide eyes as she sat down. "I wanted to talk to you," Clara said softly. "All of you. I know this is strange, having a stranger come into your home, but I want you to know that I'm here to help, not to hurt you." Sarah's lips parted slightly, and for a moment Clara thought she might speak. Instead, she reached under her pillow and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded many times. With trembling fingers, she handed it to Clara. The writing was childish but clear. "We don't talk because he gets angry when we do." Clara's blood ran cold. "He? You mean Mr. Garrett?" Sarah shook her head frantically, then pointed toward the window. Outside, Clara could see the bunkhouse where Thomas employed several ranch hands. Her stomach dropped as understanding dawned. "Someone who works here." A tiny nod. Sarah pulled out another paper. "He said bad things would happen if we told, but you seem nice." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. These children had been living in fear, probably for months or longer, and Thomas either didn't know or didn't care enough to notice. She thought of his awkward explanations, his obvious discomfort with the children's silence. Did he really not know, or was he just choosing not to see? "What's his name?" Clara whispered. Sarah glanced nervously at the door, then wrote, "Jake Morrison. He's the foreman." Over the next few weeks, Clara began to piece together the truth. Jake Morrison was a hard man with a cruel streak, hired by Thomas for his ability to manage cattle and men. He ruled the ranch hands with an iron fist and had apparently extended that authority to the children. Thomas, overwhelmed by grief and responsibility, had gradually withdrawn from the daily management of his household, leaving Morrison to fill the void. The children had learned to stay invisible, to avoid Morrison's attention at all costs. They communicated through notes, hand signals, and careful silence. They'd created their own language of survival, and Clara was slowly learning to speak it. She started small, sitting with them during meals, reading stories in the evening, teaching the younger ones their letters. Gradually, she began to hear whispers, then tentative words spoken only when Morrison was away from the house. "He pulls our hair," 6-year-old Emma finally confided one afternoon while they were hanging laundry, "and he says mean words about our mama." Clara's hand stilled on the wet sheet. Emma was one of the children Thomas had taken in after her parents died in a prairie fire. "What kind of mean words?" Emma's face crumpled. "He says she was a bad lady, but she wasn't. She made the best apple pie and she sang to us at night." That evening, Clara confronted Thomas in his study. "We need to talk about Jake Morrison." Thomas looked up from his ledger, his face immediately defensive. "Morrison's a good foreman, keeps the ranch running smooth. He's terrorizing your children." "That's a strong accusation, Clara. These children came to me damaged. They've been through trauma." "Yes, they have, and you've hired someone who's adding to it." Clara pulled out the collection of notes the children had shared with her over the past weeks. "Read these." Thomas scanned the papers, his face growing pale. Stories of verbal abuse, threats, inappropriate touching that made Clara's skin crawl. The children had documented everything, creating evidence they were too afraid to share. "I didn't know," Thomas whispered finally, "because you didn't want to know. It was easier to assume they were just damaged than to actually protect them." The accusation hung between them like a drawn blade. Thomas set down the papers with shaking hands. "What do you want me to do?" "Fire him, tonight. And then you need to start actually being a father to these children instead of just a landlord." Morrison didn't go quietly. When Thomas told him to pack his things, the foreman's face twisted with rage. "You're taking the word of some fancy Eastern woman over a man who's worked for you for 3 years?" "I'm taking the word of children who've been hurt enough," Thomas replied, and Clara felt a flicker of respect for her new husband. "Those kids are liars and troublemakers, always have been. You'll see, without proper discipline, they'll run wild." "Get off my land," Thomas said quietly, but his hand rested on the gun at his hip. After Morrison left, the change wasn't immediate. Habits of fear don't break overnight, but slowly, gradually, the children began to emerge from their shells. Sarah was the first to speak aloud, asking Clara to pass the salt at dinner. The words were so unexpected that everyone froze, staring at her. "Thank you, sweetheart," Clara said as naturally as she could, and the spell was broken. Within a month, the house was filled with the normal sounds of childhood: laughter, arguments, questions asked in full voice instead of whispered notes. Clara established routines that the children could count on: morning lessons, afternoon chores, evening stories. She taught them that their voices mattered, that they had the right to speak up when something was wrong. Thomas, for his part, began to thaw as well. He started joining them for evening stories, teaching the older boys ranch work, braiding Sarah's hair in the mornings. Clara watched him rediscover his own capacity for gentleness, and she began to understand why she'd felt compelled to stay. The transformation wasn't without setbacks. 10-year-old Mark had nightmares that left him screaming for his mother.
Emma wet the bed for weeks after Morrison left, her body finally relaxing enough to admit her fear. The twins, Bobby and Billy, had developed a secret language that excluded everyone else, and it took months to convince them that speaking English wouldn't bring punishment. But Clara was patient. She'd grown up as one of 7 children in a Boston tenement, and she understood that love was sometimes more about showing up consistently than saying the right words. Every day she proved that she wasn't going away, that she could be trusted with their fears and their joys. The turning point came on a cold November evening when a stranger appeared at their door. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a badge, introducing himself as Marshal William Crawford. "I'm looking for Jake Morrison," he said. "There've been some accusations made against him in the next county." Clara's blood ran cold, but she invited him in for coffee. As they talked, the marshal explained that Morrison had been accused of inappropriate behavior with children at his new job. "The thing is, people like Morrison usually have a pattern. I was hoping to find other victims who might be willing to testify." Clara looked at Thomas, then at the children who had gathered curiously in the doorway. "Children, could you come here, please?" They filed into the parlor, and Clara knelt down to Sarah's level. "This man is a marshal. He's trying to make sure that Jake Morrison can't hurt any more children. Would you be willing to tell him what happened here?" The silence stretched so long that Clara thought they'd retreated back into their shells. Then Sarah cleared her throat. "He used to grab us real hard," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "and he said if we told anyone, something bad would happen to the little ones." One by one, the other children found their voices. They told Marshal Crawford about the fear, the threats, the way Morrison had made them feel powerless in their own home. Their words were halting at first, then stronger as they realized that speaking up wasn't going to bring punishment. "You're very brave," the marshal told them when they finished. "Because of what you've told me, Morrison won't be able to hurt other children." After the marshal left, Clara found herself surrounded by 8 children who had finally learned that their voices had power. They peppered her with questions. What would happen to Morrison? Were they really safe now? Could they keep talking whenever they wanted? "Always," Clara promised them. "Your voices matter. Your feelings matter. And anyone who tries to silence you will have to answer to me." That night, as she tucked the youngest ones into bed, little Emma grabbed her hand. "Mrs. Clara, are you going to stay forever?" Clara smoothed the child's hair, thinking of the long journey that had brought her here. Not just the stagecoach ride from Boston, but the emotional journey from stranger to protector to mother. "Forever," she promised. Years later, when the children were grown and scattered across the territory with families of their own, they would remember Clara not as the mail-order bride who came to marry their father, but as the woman who taught them that their voices deserved to be heard. She had arrived to find 8 children trapped in silence, and she had become the voice they trusted to speak their truth. The ranch that had once echoed with fearful whispers now rang with laughter, arguments, songs, and stories. Clara had brought more than domestic help to the Garrett household. She had brought the revolutionary idea that children deserved to be protected, heard, and loved. In the end, that was the most powerful voice of all.